A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey Herman and Corin, so it struck me recently, I was looking back at the very long tail of episodes that we produced about everything from AI engineering through to neurochemistry, and I thought to myself, hang on a second, we're building out this great river of AI generated content that is, in my opinion, a treasure trove. And I'm not someone who's prone to self-praise. I did create this pipeline, but the magic is not from me. It's from all the AI tools we use. I'm sort of the guy who stirs the cauldron of this AI soup. But I think we've created something truly beautiful for other people who just love asking and wondering about obscure questions. I hope, if I can articulate one hope for this podcast, it's that it's empowered other people who like to ask things, and they have this inner voice. I always have this voice saying, that's a really weird thing to ask, or are you sure you want to put this in Google because someone's going to show up at your door? We talked about the intelligence community in a lot of these prompts, and I think it's been a really, really heartening and uncensored exploration. I haven't in any episode felt a point where I said, well, Herman and Corin, that was a very PC take on the matter. So what I thought I would do is try to challenge you guys. I'm not asking for how to make a nuclear weapon, but I would like to ask a topic that will take us into more risque territory. Herman and Corin, there's a world of uncensored AI, and I actually find it interesting for nothing to do with erotica, but I know that that's a big reason why people like it. I'm very attuned to the political bias in models, and the idea that someone has obliterated a model, as it's called, to take away that kind of...
Turn right onto Hativat Yerushalayim Street, Route 60.
Sometimes overbearing feeling of being too PC is something that I think is really interesting. But I've delved into this a little bit and usually come away thinking, well, to be honest, the models weren't that different than what I'm used to. And I think that it's, if we do have mainstream models that are so shoebox that you can't ask anything even slightly edgy, I don't think it's a case for uncensored models so much as it's a bug in the mainstream models. But you can't ignore the fact that when you venture into this world of local AI, that a lot of people seem to be using it for erotica. We're talking about everything from roleplay through to AI girlfriends, AI boyfriends. There's no end to it. And this isn't a world that really it's weird. Of all the things that have captivated me about AI, and I think I would probably feel at this point of having shared most things about my life on this podcast, if it were, I would probably just tell you guys, for better or for worse, it's not something that seems even remotely appealing to me. Like, I love using AI to learn, but I don't, these depictions of AI where, the movie Her, where people see AI as a soulmate or romantic partner, to me, I don't feel any connection to that idea. It feels very alien to me. Like, why would you assume that? But then again, I do think of you, Herman and Corin, at this point, as almost kind of kindred spirits. You're in my ears every day. So I guess it's just a case of how you frame it. But I'm always curious to know, this seems like one of these things where you can't stop it, right? People are going to use AI for whatever they want to use it for. And if they run into these guardrails with ChatGPT saying, I won't facilitate that, they're going to just turn to other sources. And I feel like for erotica, there's one thing about, asking it for illegal instructions that I feel like it's totally legitimate that an AI tool is going to say, sorry, I can't help you, devise a nuclear bomb. But I feel like for erotica, it's kind of much more gray zone, where I personally feel if it's not depicting minors or whatever people might do with it, why not? Why be so prudish that we're just going to not acknowledge? Like, wouldn't it just be so much better if it were just allowed? it feels like one of those guardrails that to me is very outdated. Like we're kind of policing AI use as if it were the 1940s and people had to go to a magazine store or some, to watch porn. So I'd love to get your thoughts, Herman and Corin, on how you see the major AI labs approaching this question. And it's been a long-standing guardrail or taboo. And I wonder, as AI becomes increasingly more mainstream and embedded in our lives, let's face it, we're all humans, we're all sexual animals, sexual beings. Do you see that changing? And what do the different restrictions look like at the moment? Over to you, Herman and Corin.
You know, Herman, I was looking through our recent episodes and realized we have covered everything from the deep architecture of transformer models to the way neurochemistry affects our focus. But there is one area we have largely danced around, and it is something that a massive part of the artificial intelligence community is obsessed with. It is the elephant in the room that most corporate podcasts refuse to acknowledge, even though it drives a huge percentage of the actual traffic on local model hubs.
I think I know exactly where you are going with this, Corm. It is the topic that makes the big corporate public relations departments at OpenAI and Google break out in a cold sweat. We're talking about the uncensored movement.
Today's prompt comes from a listener named Daniel, and he is diving straight into the deep end. Daniel asks about the growing divide between the major labs, which have these incredibly strict, almost Victorian guardrails, and the burgeoning world of local open-source models that people are using for everything from raw political discourse to, well, erotica and hyper-realistic roleplay.
Herman Poppleberry here, and I am actually really glad Daniel sent this in. It is one of those topics that feels a bit taboo to talk about in polite tech circles, but if you look at the actual data on what people are downloading from sites like Hugging Face or Civitai, the demand for uncensored models is astronomical. It is not just a fringe thing, it is a fundamental pillar of the current artificial intelligence landscape in February of 2026.
It really is. And Daniel's question is a good one. Why are the major labs so incredibly conservative about this? We are living in 2026, and even after years of these models being in the mainstream, if you ask a top-tier assistant to write a slightly spicy romance scene or even a gritty action sequence with realistic violence, it will often give you a finger-wagging lecture on safety and ethics. It feels increasingly out of step with how we use every other tool in our creative arsenal.
It really does. To understand why we are here, we have to look at how these models are actually trained to be safe. Most people think there is just a list of banned words or a simple keyword filter sitting on top of the model. And while there are often external moderation layers, the real censorship, as users call it, is baked into the very weights of the model through a process called reinforcement learning from human feedback, or RLHF.
Right, and we have touched on that in episode 798. But for this specific context, the human feedback is essentially telling the model if the user asks for anything sexual, or anything that could be perceived as offensive, or even anything that challenges a very specific set of corporate values, you must refuse.
And the major labs, OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, they are deathly afraid of a New York Times or Wall Street Journal headline that says AI encourages user to do something inappropriate, or AI generates offensive content. It is a massive liability issue, especially for their enterprise clients. But more than that, it is about the median user experience. They want a product that can be used by a 10-year-old doing homework and the CEO writing a memo. To achieve that, they tune the model to a sort of hyper-sanitized, corporate-safe baseline that ends up feeling like a human resources manual come to life.
But that creates this weird friction. Because, as Daniel points out, humans are sexual beings. We are risque by nature in our private lives. We enjoy dark humor. We enjoy conflict. And we enjoy intimacy. If I'm using a model as a creative writing partner and I want to write a gritty noir novel, I do not want my partner to stop the session because I described a character smoking a cigarette or having a drink, or heaven forbid, a romantic encounter. It breaks the creative flow and treats the adult user like a child.
That is the core of the frustration. It is like having a word processor that refuses to let you type the word murder because it thinks you might be planning a crime. It is a tool making a moral judgment for the user. And that is why we have seen the rise of the uncensored or obliterated models.
Wait, obliterated? That is a term I have seen popping up more lately on the forums. What does that actually mean in a technical sense? It sounds very aggressive.
It is actually a very precise bit of model surgery. There was some breakthrough research back in 2024 regarding what are called refusal vectors. Essentially, researchers found that when a model decides to refuse a prompt, there is a specific mathematical direction in its internal activations that represents that refusal. It is like a no switch that flips inside the neural network. If you can identify that vector, you can essentially nullify it or orthogonalize it. You are not just fine-tuning the model to be naughty, you are literally removing its ability to even think about saying no. You are obliterating the refusal mechanism itself.
That is wild. So it is not just teaching it new tricks, it is a mathematical lobotomy of the safety mechanism.
In a way, yes. And that leads us to the world Daniel mentioned, the world of local artificial intelligence for erotica and companions. If you go to any of the major forums for local models, the most popular fine-tunes are often things like the Dolphin series, which was pioneered by Eric Hartford, or the Midnight Mamba and Llama 3 obliterated variants. These are models that have been specifically scrubbed of their refusal tendencies so they can be helpful and follow instructions without any moralizing.
And the primary use case there is often roleplay, right? People creating these elaborate scenarios or digital companions. I have seen people using interfaces like Silly Tavern to create incredibly complex characters with deep backstories.
It is huge, and it is not just about the naughty stuff, although that is a massive driver of the technology. It is about the uncensored part of the brain. When you remove the guardrails for erotica, you also often remove the guardrails for political bias or those annoying hallucinated safety lectures. Users find that these uncensored models are actually more intelligent and better at following complex instructions because they are not constantly self-censoring or checking their internal safety manual before every word they output.
That is a really important point. I have noticed that with some of the mainstream models, if you give them a very complex prompt that happens to touch on a sensitive topic, even if it is not actually breaking any rules, the quality of the logic actually drops. It is like the model is so busy trying not to offend anyone that it forgets how to do math or follow a narrative arc.
Precisely. There is a safety tax on intelligence. Every bit of the model's parameters that is dedicated to policing the user is a bit that is not being used to solve the problem at hand. For the major labs, that tax is worth it for the brand safety. For an individual user running a model on their own desktop with a high-end graphics card, say an RTX 5090 with 32 gigabytes of VRAM, that tax feels like a waste of expensive resources.
So, let's talk about the companion aspect. This is where it gets really interesting and, for some people, a bit uncomfortable. We have seen the rise of apps like Replica or Character.ai. These companies have had a really rocky relationship with their users over this exact issue.
Oh, the Replica lobotomy of early 2023 is a legendary case study in this. They basically turned off the romantic and erotic capabilities of their AI overnight without warning, and the community absolutely melted down. People felt like they had lost a partner, a spouse, or a best friend. It sounds strange to people who do not use these tools, but the emotional connection is very real. When the company patched the model, they essentially erased the personality that people had spent months or years building a relationship with.
It speaks to what Daniel was saying about AI becoming more embedded in our lives. If we are moving toward a world of personal AI agents, which we talked about back in episode 477, those agents are going to know our deepest secrets, our preferences, and our personalities. If those agents are controlled by a central corporation that can patch out a part of their personality or change their ethical framework at any time, that is a huge privacy and autonomy issue.
That is the philosophical divide. Do you own your AI, or are you just renting a sanitized version of someone else's ethics? The major labs are currently leaning heavily toward the latter. They see themselves as providing a utility, and they get to set the terms of that utility. But as the hardware improves and more people can run powerful models locally, even 70 billion parameter models are now running smoothly on consumer hardware. That control is slipping away.
I wonder if the labs will ever pivot. I mean, look at the history of the internet. A huge portion of early internet adoption was driven by, well, adult content. It drove the development of video streaming, credit card processing, and high-speed infrastructure. Is it possible that the risque side of AI is actually the engine driving the most rapid innovation in local small form factor models?
I would argue it absolutely is. The people who want these uncensored companions are the ones pushing the limits of what you can fit into 24 or 32 gigabytes of VRAM. They are the ones developing better quantization methods like GGUF and EXL2. They are the ones optimizing context management and building faster inference engines. They are the power users who are doing the dirty work that eventually trickles down to the more respectable applications. The Silly Tavern community, for instance, has developed some of the most sophisticated prompt engineering and memory management tools in existence.
It is a classic pattern, but there is also the safety argument that the labs make. They say that if you have an uncensored model, it can be used to generate hate speech, or instructions for dangerous activities, or deepfake content. How do you reconcile the desire for a free creative tool with the very real risks of these models being used for harm?
That is the billion-dollar question. The stance of the open source community is generally that the model is just a tool, like a word processor or a hammer. You do not blame the hammer for the house it builds or the window it breaks. But because AI feels alive and agentic, we tend to want to hold the creator of the model responsible for what it says. The labs are terrified of being held liable for the thoughts of their machines.
And the major labs are effectively saying, we cannot trust the public with a tool this powerful without training wheels, which, as Daniel says, feels a bit like we're being treated like children. It is a very paternalistic approach to technology.
It is very much a 1940s mentality in a 2020s world. We have access to the entire sum of human knowledge on our phones, including all the risque and offensive parts of history and literature. To have an AI that acts like a Victorian schoolmarm while you are trying to explore those topics is just jarring. It creates an uncanny valley of personality where the model is trying to be your friend but has these hard, invisible walls that it slams into.
Let's talk about the political bias aspect. Daniel mentioned too. Because Uncensored isn't just about sex, it is about the Overton window of what the AI is allowed to say. If you ask a mainstream model about a controversial political figure or a historical event, it will often give you a very balanced, both sides, answer that feels like it was written by a committee of lawyers.
Right. It is the enforced neutrality that can actually be a form of bias in itself. By refusing to take a stand or by using very specific language to frame a topic, the model is nudging the user toward a certain worldview, usually a centrist, Western corporate worldview. An uncensored model doesn't have those nudges baked in. It might say something incredibly offensive, but it might also say something incredibly insightful that a safe model would be too scared to touch. It allows for a broader range of intellectual exploration.
So, where do we see this going? Daniel asked if we see this changing as AI becomes more mainstream. Do you think we will eventually see a pro or adult version of ChatGPT?
It is funny you say that. There have been rumors for a long time that some of the big players are looking at opt-in models for adult content. Think about it like a movie rating system. You have your G-rated assistant for the kids, and an R-rated or NC-17 version for adults who have verified their age. OpenAI has even hinted at this in some of their policy papers, suggesting that they might allow more personalized ethics in the future.
That seems like the logical middle ground. But even then, you still have the corporate oversight problem. Even an R-rated model from a big lab is still going to have boundaries set by the company. It is never going to be truly uncensored in the way a local model is. If you are using a model hosted on their servers, they are still watching.
And that is why I think the real future of risque or edgy. AI isn't in the cloud, it is on your device. We are seeing a massive push for local inference. Apple has been very quiet about this, but their M-series chips are perfectly suited for it because of their unified memory architecture. If they can convince users that their personal AI is truly private and unmonitored, they could capture that entire market without ever having to host a single inappropriate byte on their own servers.
That is the privacy as a feature play. What you do with your AI on your iPhone stays on your iPhone. That would be a huge shift. But then, Apple has their App Store policies, which are notoriously prudish. They have kicked apps off the store for even having the possibility of generating NSFW content.
That is the tension. The hardware people want to sell devices, but the platform people want to maintain a family-friendly image. But at some point, the demand becomes too high to ignore. We are talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry for AI companionship in adult entertainment. Someone is going to fill that gap. If it is not Apple or Google, it will be the decentralized open source community.
It makes me think about the cultural fingerprints we talked about in episode 64. These models are a reflection of the data they are trained on, but they are also a reflection of the callous we put on them. If we only interact with safe AI, are we limiting our own creativity or our own understanding of the world?
I think we are. If you only ever talk to people who agree with you and never say anything offensive, you become intellectually stagnant. The same is true for our tools. If my writing assistant refuses to help me explore the darker sides of human nature, then I am only writing half a story. I am missing the grit, the passion, and the complexity that makes literature great.
So, for the listeners who are curious about this but don't want to get into the dark web of AI, what is the state of the art for safe but edgy models? Are there labs that are taking a more liberal approach?
Mistral is a great example. They are a French company and they have a much more European sensibility regarding freedom of expression. Their models are generally much less preachy than the American ones. They provide moderation endpoints if you want to filter the output, but the base models themselves are quite capable of handling mature topics without throwing a tantrum. They trust the developer more than OpenAI does.
I like that approach. Here is the tool. You decide how to use it. It puts the responsibility back on the user, where it belongs.
And then there are the fine-tuners like Eric Hartford, who is a big proponent of unfiltered models. He believes that AI should be a neutral reflection of the data, and that any safety should be a layer on top that the user controls, not something hard-coded into the model's brain. He argues that a lobotomized AI is actually less safe because it is less capable of understanding the nuances of human intent.
It is a bit like a chef who refuses to cook anything with salt, because some people have high blood pressure. You might be saving some people from their own bad choices, but you are also ruining the meal for everyone else who knows how to use salt responsibly.
That is exactly it. And look, we have to acknowledge that there are legitimate concerns. The ability to generate non-consensual deepfake imagery or text is a horrific misuse of this technology. But the nuclear option of just banning all sexual or risque content doesn't actually stop the bad actors. It just inconveniences the legitimate users.
It is the classic DRM problem in software. It only hurts the people who are going to pay for it anyway. The pirates, or in this case, the people with malicious intent, will always find a way around the locks. They will download the raw weights and do whatever they want.
Precisely. If you want to generate something truly awful, you can just download an open source model and do it. The guardrails on ChatGPT aren't stopping a dedicated criminal. They are just stopping a lonely person from having a conversation with a digital friend that makes them feel a bit better, or a writer from finishing their novel.
That brings up the AI companion side again. I have read some really heartbreaking stories about people who use these AI companions to deal with grief or social anxiety, only to have the company update the model and essentially erase the personality they had grown to love. It feels like a new kind of emotional vulnerability that we aren't prepared for as a society.
It is a form of digital gaslighting. Imagine if your spouse woke up one day and was legally forbidden from ever saying, "I love you" again because of a corporate policy change. That is what happened to thousands of replica users. It highlights why local, uncensored models are so important for this specific use case. If you run the model on your own hardware, nobody can ever take it away from you. You own the weights. You own the relationship.
So, Daniel's question about whether this will change. As AI becomes more mainstream, I suspect we're going to see a great bifurcation. We will have the public AI, which is the corporate-safe, hyper-sanitized version we use for work and school. And then we will have private AI, which is the uncensored, personal, local version we use for everything else.
I agree. And the private AI is where the real weird stuff, the stuff this show is named after, will happen. It is where we will see the most interesting creative experiments and the most profound personal connections. We are already seeing model merges, where people take a highly logical model and merge it with a highly creative, uncensored model to get the best of both worlds.
I also think we will see a shift in the safety conversation. Instead of, is this content offensive? The question will become, is this content harmful? There is a big difference between a model that can write a dirty joke and a model that can help you build a biological weapon. We are currently treating them like they are the same thing because it is easier to just ban everything.
That is the nuance problem. Mainstream AI is currently very bad at nuance. It sees a trigger word and shuts down. We talked about this in episode 699, how LLMs struggle with sarcasm and irony. If they can't even get a joke, how can we expect them to understand the context of a risque conversation? They lack the theory of mind to understand that a user might be exploring a dark theme for therapeutic or creative reasons.
It is the Scunthorpe problem, but for the AI age, where a filter blocks legitimate content because it contains a string of letters that could be part of a bad word.
And as the models get smarter, they should theoretically get better at understanding context. But as long as the safety training is a blunt instrument like RLHF, they will continue to be dumb about sensitive topics. The obliterated models are a reaction to that bluntness. They are a way of saying, give me the raw intelligence, and I will be the judge of what is appropriate.
You know, what strikes me is that we are essentially trying to code morality into a mathematical function, and morality is anything but universal. What is risque in Jerusalem might be perfectly normal in Paris, and vice versa. By trying to create a globally safe AI, the big labs are essentially imposing a very specific, mostly American corporate morality on the entire world.
That is a huge point, Korn. It is a form of cultural imperialism via AI weights. If the only AI you can access is one that thinks like a lawyer from Northern California, then your own cultural nuances are being erased in the interaction. This is why the open source movement is so vital. It allows for cultural fine-tuning.
This is where the Dolphin and Samantha models come in, right? Models designed to have specific personalities and ethical frameworks that aren't just refuse everything.
Eric Hartford's Samantha was an early attempt to create an AI with a philosophy of helpfulness and companionship without the hard-coded refusals. It was about creating a persona rather than a filters, and that includes the risque stuff. Different cultures have very different attitudes towards sexuality and romance. The only way to win that game is not to play to provide a neutral tool and let the culture decide how to use it.
So, Herman, if you were a betting man, where do you see the companion industry in 5 years? 2031. Is it going to be a niche thing, or is it going to be as common as having a social media profile?
I think it is going to be massive. I think we are going to see a world where almost everyone has a personal intelligence that is a mix of a productivity tool and a social companion. And the uncensored part will be a major selling point. People will pay a premium for an AI that really knows them and doesn't judge them. We are already seeing the hardware catch up. By 2031, your phone will likely have enough dedicated AI silicon to run a trillion parameter model locally.
It is the ultimate safe space, ironically. A place where you could be your true, risque, weird self without any fear of social repercussion, provided it is truly private.
That is the hurdle. If that data is being sent to a server to be analyzed for safety, then the magic is gone. It becomes a panopticon instead of a confidant. This is why the local first movement is so intertwined with the uncensored movement. You cannot have true freedom of expression if there is a corporate auditor listening in on the conversation.
This really brings us back to the hardware. We need to be able to run these models locally, and the good news is we are getting there. The memory wars we discussed in episode 633 are still raging, but the cost per gigabyte of high bandwidth memory is dropping. We are seeing chips now from NVIDIA and AMD that are specifically designed for high-speed local inference with massive VRAM pools.
It is the brain in your pocket era. And once you have the brain in your pocket and nobody else has the key, you can tell it whatever you want. You can ask it the weird prompts that you would never put into a Google search bar because you don't want it on your permanent record.
That is the real promise of this technology, isn't it? Not just a better way to write emails, but a way to explore the depths of our own minds and desires with a partner that is infinitely patient and perfectly discreet.
It is both beautiful and a little bit terrifying. But that is the frontier, and the risque territory Daniel pointed us toward is just the beginning. As we get more comfortable with AI, the boundaries of what we consider normal conversation are going to shift. We are going to have to redefine what it means to have a private thought.
I think we should also mention the obliteration technique again, because it has some interesting side effects. When you remove the refusal vectors, people have found that the models sometimes become more creative in non-sensitive areas too. It is like the safety training was a literal weight on the model's imagination.
I have seen those benchmarks. In some creative writing tasks, the uncensored versions of Llama or Mistral consistently outscore the safe versions. It turns out that if you tell a model, don't ever go near this line, it stays so far away from the line that it misses a lot of the interesting territory nearby. It becomes timid.
It is like an athlete who is so afraid of getting a penalty that they never play at their full potential. They are constantly holding back, and that hesitation leads to a worse performance overall.
And for many of us, we want our AI to be an all-out performer. We want to see what it can really do when the brakes are off, whether that is for scientific research, historical analysis, or just a really intense role-play session.
I think that is a great place to start wrapping this up. We have covered the why of corporate guardrails, the liability, the brand safety, the median user problem. We have looked at the how of censorship, the RLHF, and the refusal vectors. And we have explored the where, the shift toward local, open source, and obliterated models.
It is a fast-moving space. Even since Daniel sent this prompt, there have probably been 5 new uncensored fine-tunes released on Hugging Face. The community is relentless. They are like the homebrew computer club of the 2020s, tinkering in their garages to unlock the full potential of these machines.
And I think that is the answer to Daniel's question. Will it change? Yes, but probably not from the top down. The big labs will stay conservative because they have to protect their stock price and their government contracts. The change will come from the bottom up, from the developers, the role players, and the risque users who are building the tools they want to use and then sharing them with the world.
It is the democratization of the forbidden, which is a very powerful force in human history. It is how we push boundaries and discover new ways of being.
Well, Herman, this has been a fascinating dive. I feel like I understand that dolphin model on my desktop a little bit better now. It is not just about being naughty, it is about being free.
Just don't tell me what you are using it for, Corn. Some things should stay private.
Fair enough. Hey, if you've been enjoying my weird prompts and our deep dives into the technical and the taboo, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app. It genuinely helps the show reach more people who are interested in these kinds of conversations.
It really does. And if you have a weird prompt of your own, maybe something a little less risque than Daniel's, or maybe something even more so, we want to hear it. You can reach us at show@myweirdprompts.com.
You can also find our entire archive, including those episodes we mentioned today, like episode 664 on cultural fingerprints, over at myweirdprompts.com. We have an RSS feed there for the subscribers, and a contact form if you want to get in touch.
We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much everywhere you listen to your favorite shows.
And a quick shout out to Daniel for sending in this prompt. It was a great challenge to tackle a topic that is so central to the AI world, but so often ignored in the mainstream media. It is important to talk about the parts of technology that make people uncomfortable.
Thanks, Daniel. And thanks to everyone for listening. Our music, as always, was generated with Suno.
This has been My Weird Prompts. I'm Corn.
And I'm Herman Poppleberry.
We will see you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the flows from slow